Hello, everybody. For those who signed up, probably read that today's talk is called Natural Origins of VFX and its impact on its players. But what does it actually mean? It's kind of an ambiguous name. So it means that for the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore the psychology, the maths, the science, and the arts of visual effects and how literally everything plays into what visual effects artists do today. So I am Augusta. I work as a junior VFX artist at Lab 42 Games, and I make visual effects art into my whole personality a little bit too much, but it's okay because I have a background in classical piano, traditional and digital arts, and hardware and tech, and literally all of these play a part in what I do today. You will see why. So, if you are a visual effects artist here, you probably know that visual effects art is literal digital sorcery. But aren't magicians just visual manipulators? Well, let's take UI art, for example. It's literally taking naming conventions and icons and manipulating the player consciously on what to do. A better example would be taking a level designer, where an environment artist, where you literally take lighting and soundscapes and the composition of the level to lead the player unconsciously. But it turns out that visual effects also influences conscious decisions through unconscious reactions. And it comes down to biology. Because VFX consists of motion, colors, patterns, physics, and all of these are susceptible to human brain. And our brains at the very core don't really care whether something just doesn't feel good or right or wrong. It literally feels, it just tries to recognize whether something tries to kill you or not. Is it good or is it bad? It's all just Boolean thinking, whether it's decision making or recognizing patterns. So why is that? Let's take a look at the example with faces. Did you notice that you only really notice faces if there's something doesn't feel right with them? And it's mainly because it comes down to the history when we were living in tribes and we would face somebody with some deformities on their face. It would mean that they're sick. It means that we could potentially die, and all of this came back haunting us today. And it's probably why your bad portraits on art forums are so called out immediately, because you might have gotten used to them, but a fresh eye is always alert. That's why even if you don't notice mistakes, the others definitely will. Another example would be to take music. Why is it so relaxing for us? Well, a rhythm is a biological thing as well, because all our lives were followed by our heartbeat, by breathing, by walking, and so it feels kind of familiar to us. And if you take something that is offbeat, it's immediately unnatural, and that's why bad animation is also noticed immediately, because of it obstructs the biological rhythms. So, for example, if you were to, don't know if I recommend to do this or not, but if you were to face a person who's like chaotically mad at you, like it's all over the place. But while listening to them, you could, like, for example, tap on the table in a rhythmic manner. Even I struggle to speak with it because my brain tries to synchronize with it, and they would immediately also calm down. Do this at your own risk. So let's hop a little bit into color, and because it also has apparently unconscious, biological, psychological, and cultural interpretations. As we know, red, well, it is probably the most contrasting color amongst others, and it represents danger because, well, danger back in the day would probably mean blood, fire, but fire also means power. But what happens if we add something that is joyous, warm, represents the sun, but also for some reason it means caution? This is also due to because later in history we noticed that it has high contrasting colors. It's a high contrasting color just like red, and we now use it to bring the attention. And if we add them together, we notice that it's kind of a similar palette because This is how VFX artists represent fire, and we know this without any other magical instruments. But let's make it a little bit more interesting and introduce green in the picture. Of course, it's something comes from nature, it's a sign of healing, and VFX artists very much know this by hand because it invites the player and signals that it's something safe. So this is all kind of common sense, but what happens with purple? See, purple is quite rare in the nature, and its pigment is really hard to get. So did you notice that there's like no flags in purple? It's mainly, and if there are, it's probably because of royalty. The pigment is really hard to get. That's why it doesn't really mix in the nature too much. We're not really used to it. So let's try to mix it with other colors. Let's see what happens. What if we pick the same green color? It's something we thought it's something of healing and nature and safety. But it turns out that when we try to recreate the color back in the day, we created it with toxic ingredients, and we used to poison people with those. Therefore, mixing with something that is mysterious and ambiguous, we get something quite poisonous and yet again scary. So if back in the day we used to kill people with the nature of the ingredients of the color, now we kill enemies in our games. So I also will take probably someone's favorite color, which is blue. Probably his favorite because it's so calm, it's the sky, it's reliable and calm energy. And yet again, I have picked a purple here. Can you guess what happens again? We yet again have something that is magical. Because most of the blue is in the sky, most of the purple is on the ground. They don't really clash together naturally. We have to actually take the tools and make that happen. We don't see that often. Therefore, if we do see that, I guess one of the least few examples would be seeing a sunset. It collides, it becomes a purple, therefore we think it's so magical, it's so fascinating. And yet again, we use this to induce magic in our games. Similar thing happens with yellow, something joyous, and yet again, you get a joyous and warm arcane magic. And this suddenly becomes something celestial, and you could even say perhaps quite prestige because, well, purple is also royalty and yellow also represents gold, so it's also a way to represent a prestige and a sign of wealth. Now, a bit of a physics lesson. I'm not going to delve too deep into it, but what I noticed is that, as we know, our brains are also attuned to we are attuned to detecting anomalies, and water is just too common of an element in our world not to notice. It catches so much light, it's always moving, so we just know how it's supposed to look like. Unfortunately, realism is just too expensive, and when something is realistic, but not realistic enough, it can't, that's why our players are like, nah, this is, like, it doesn't feel right. Like, yes, you're doing a good job, but it's just not gonna feel right, and well, this is what we have to deal with, and that's why stylization comes in place, because if water is stylistic, we immediately interpret it as a form of art, not a representation of real life. So, with all of this information, why are we actually captivated by all of this? It's quite a philosophical question, but I think the best way to define this would be to look at fire. Because how can we look at it and rather than feeling bored, we can feel relaxed, we can feel empowered, threatened, inspired, and yet again, is our brains thinking, is it good or bad for us? Is it gonna kill us or not? Because when we're looking at it, we're seeing what is the pace, what is the size, what is the color, and once the criteria meets, yes, we're not gonna die, we suddenly feel enthralled, almost like fascinated, and we cannot really get bored of it. Simply because I would like you to remember, well, fire is dynamic, it's unpredictable, and this will lead down the talk. But before that, I would like you to introduce to a bit of a science break, because I really wanted to show you how magic actually exists in real life. And whether we take this as inspiration or not, I think we should. It is possible to recreate it. Don't try this at home. Because apparently there's ways to create different colors of fire. For example, green. It's because of boric acid. And in simple words, that's a substance that's used in creams, in cleaning products, eye drops, but apparently it also makes fire green. Purple or pink fire, for example, it's just lithium chloride found in metal and air conditioners that absorbs air, but apparently it also makes the fire pretty and quite pink. And for those who are a little bit gothic here, we can make black fire too. This is used by alcohol fire, salt water, lit by a sodium vapor lamp, and here we go. The black fire that actually also emits a shadow. So when all of this could come together and make something fascinating, and one of the series that did this quite well, if anybody has seen The Lord of the Rings, I haven't, but I have seen their I have seen their intro, which is brilliant. It's literally, there's no visual effects here. It's all just molten metals, redwood, sparkler dust, liquid hydrogen coming together and making something amazing, all in slow motion. And again, you don't really see this come naturally. We have to put this together. That's why we can just keep looking at it. It's just so beautiful. But fire is not the only magical element in the world. There are some there are some elements and energies that cannot be seen by the naked eye, and there are tools like Schlerin imaging that can capture the fluid flow. And yet again, there are games like Control that, well, it's my own theory. I don't think they use this as a reference, or maybe, but you could see that the same fluid flow was used to distort the image for the hiss ability. Another way to capture invisible energy is through magnetic dust. And I saw Bioshock Infinite does this really well because it's a game grounded by reality, but still uses lots of magic. So their magic is supposed to be realistic, which now we know is rather possible. So do you remember why are we fascinated just before we took a break? If you still need a reminder, I would like to invite you to imagine yourself as a kid looking at the kaleidoscope. Why are kids in love with them? Because, well, kids are not too far from our adult versions. And as adults, we're seeking the same things as kids: unpredictability. It's simply a core pillar of today's entertainment. If our games are not unpredictable enough, they're not going to be played by our players. They're not going to be streamed on Twitch. Nobody's going to be watching them. So our effects have to match that and entice the player to look at them forward. Same goes to the fantasy and escapism. We strive for a sense of wonder and a sense of endless possibilities, a sense of control that we cannot get in our real life. So games are to escape reality. Therefore, visual effects are there to supply that fantasy, even to our adult players. So we now know that there's human nature, environmental nature, but nature can also be defined in maths. So, have you ever looked closely into a leaf? If you haven't, you may need to touch grass. But have you ever looked into a dry mud that gets clustered? Or looked at the skin of the giraffe? Or just innocent set of bubbles that are clustered together? Now, do you notice anything? Isn't there like a sort of a pattern? And yes, we actually have the name for it, both in mathematical sense and technical, and game artists use an algorithm named Voronoi. It's when a space is partitioned into regions based on the distance to a set of points. And now going a little bit deeper into optimization of this and how we use this, in Unity, we can see that this is just an innocent set of a couple nodes that are moving slowly, like what is there about it? But if you were to recreate this in Unreal, you suddenly notice that you need to generate the points, calculate the distance gradient, keep the one with minimum value, repeat the calculation 8 times, each time offsetting every neighbor's direction, and I say screw that. As a VFX artist, most of it you don't need. Save the nerves of your technical artist and yourself and stick to something that is baked in. And most of the time, if you just pan this, distort this a little bit, you get a much cheaper result, resulting in something that is quite extraordinary. Because yes, Voronoi literally is dominating the visual effects because you can create magic with it, you can create blood, you create liquids with it. And not only that, but it's also used as a form to destruct everything. This is me practicing Houdini procedural fracturing and chaos, and both of them use the same Voronoi algorithm, but instead we saw it in 2D. Now it's just a cube partitioned and cut into Voronoi pieces into 3D space, and mixed with a little bit of physics, we destruct, with the help of physics, we destruct the meshes that way. There's another algorithm that I would like to introduce you. It's called a Fibonacci sequence. And artists probably know that it's a wonderful way to find a perfect composition of your art piece. But while this is all known, I noticed that musicians use this quite successfully as well in 2 ways. So first way to use the sequence would be, perhaps if you want to create a piece of music, you could place the 1, 3, 5, 8, etc., the sequence on the chords, and every single time you're gonna get a great harmony. A second way to use Fibonacci in music, and this is what composers back in the day, is a theory, but back in the day, would use this, is to calculate the climax of the piece. So there is a formula used to find at what point it is the best to create the explosion, the crescendo of the music. It's both in classical music and in the pop music. And I'm gonna give you a QR code to my resources where you can delve a little bit further in this. So VFX is a combination of visual and rhythmic arts. So perhaps we could steal a little bit of this information and use to calculate the climax of our own animation sequences. And the calculation is as follows. It's by Gary Ewer. I'm taking the VFX, the amount of seconds, multiplying by the small 5, taking the decimal. I will show you how it works. Don't worry, I come from art background, okay? So it's not gonna be as bad. Look how it works. So this is one of my sequences that I did last year. And it's about 4.6 seconds. If I multiply it by the small 5, take the decimal part, multiply it by 60, pardon my mistake, 2 plus 55, and then we get 2.54. 54, sorry, yeah. So what happens if I find the 2.54 seconds in the piece? Now, not sure if let's just look at the whole sequence. Yep, just an anticipation, explosion, anticipation. And I'm gonna find the 2.55 here. 54, sorry. Nope. I guess I will have to stop this. So let's say this is the example. This is the explosion. Can I scrub this? No, I can't. Yeah, I'll have to time this. We'll do this another way. So I'm gonna stop this exactly at the point where this explodes. And I'm not sure if you can see. Please. Let's see, this is, yeah, 2.6 if you can see. And if I play this, boom, exact point. So let's say, yeah, I made a mistake here, like I'm delusional, let's take another one. It's about, this is another one that I did. It's 3.1 seconds, multiplying by the small 5, getting the whole number, taking the whole number, multiplying by 60, taking, adding the whole number plus the result of the second calculation, the fraction of the second calculation. Adding that together, 1.5. And if we look at the whole sequence, yet again, an AoE attack that I did, but I'll try to time this at, nope, this is already where it happened. 1, 2, yeah. Let's see, this is where it begins, or so. Come on. That's 44. So about, yeah, 149, 48. This is already too late, but 1.58, between 1.50, 1.58, as I got 1.54, this is where the explosion happens. But again, these both were made by me. And if you're not convinced, let's take somebody else's work here, made by PolyM. It's a little bit longer, it takes about 11.24, and the result of it is 6.55. So we're supposed to get this at around that time. Let's try to find that out. Dun, dun, dun. Boom. Okay, let's see. 6.56. So almost a millisecond. If you need one more example, just to really crack this on, this is one by Charlotte. 3.8 seconds. We need to see what happens at the 2.2. Let's try to catch the explosion again. Nope, too late. Come on. 2.22. 2.20 is about, yeah, 2.2. So, of course, this is an example that nobody really, I took a bunch of examples and all of them face the same formula, but I'm pretty sure nobody really calculates this. But what I'm proving you with this is that our brains are idling, and when they are looking at anticipation, they're expecting that explosion to happen at exact point, after which we have the percentage where we feel that it's tolerable to wait for the dissipation to happen. So what are the key takeaways today that I would like you to remember? First, we can always tell when VFX feels off, just like we can always tell when anatomy, rhythm, and physics are incorrect. Remember, our brains are Boolean thinking. Is it gonna kill us or not? 2, colors have strong historical and evolutionary meanings. Mixing in purple almost always makes an effect feel manageable because it's just so rare of a pigment to get, so hard of a pigment to get, and so rare in nature. 3, we watch entertainment and VFX just like the child watches into kaleidoscope. So are we as creators unpredictable enough and are able to entice the player just like the child is looking at the kaleidoscope? 4, Voronoi patterns in nature inspire our textures. Fibonacci sequencing can help us find the perfect timing for climax. Again, maths are all around us, whether they are psychological or visual or actual, quite literally mathematical. So I read a book called Real-Time Effects for Technical Artists by Chris Roda. And he talked about how he met a watercolor artist who became a really good proceduralist because he got used to predicting how water moves really well. And all because of that background, he's good in procedural art. So what I'm saying is that just look at the math around you, really, because even myself, I am from art. I did arts and music and tech, and all of them play a part in visual effects. So if you just pay a little bit of attention, you may notice that maybe a bubble of lava may inspire a perfect shape for a shield effect, or maybe just a pint of beer from a foam will create a beautiful stylized liquid effect. So you never know what will inspire you. Thank you. So feel free to scan this if you're interested and ask away, or just throw any feedback, any thoughts. Have you found maybe something that could potentially work for your own projects or for your own piece of art?
Hello. Thank you. That was really, really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was interesting you were talking about colours, because we kind of all have our unconscious bias on what colours relate to different things. It was interesting you did the green was health, but then it was also poison. Do you find that you're having to battle against the biases of a colour of like a VFX? Let's say you want to just artistically make a VFX. Do you find that you sort of lean into the bias, or do you try and push back against it? And how do you kind of balance that?
I don't think I've ever consciously tried to push back, because, well, color wheel also exists for a reason, because they are complementary, monochrome colors, and nothing else really works. If I'm gonna use the anything besides those other, that doesn't fit in those rules, it's just not gonna look correct. And why? Yet again, that's how we grew up. So I guess there's just no way to do this, because if I'm gonna fight, somebody else will interpret it in another way. Well, the way that is probably how most people interpret it. And yeah, unfortunately, everything is based on the color wheel, and that's why color theory is the thing. But I would like to explore that. Maybe I'm wrong, actually. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi there. So this is sort of going slightly beyond the VFX side of it. Obviously, some of the sequences you were showing with the Fibonacci sort of outcomes were from sort of AoE attacks and stuff like that. Have you found similar patterns in animation or other departments that you're working with, where you get the same kind of timings coming out of moves they might be animating or other similar things?
Since I'm primarily a VFX artist, but VFX art is a niche discipline that comes from animation and from technical art. So I think it does apply to animation just as much. Not sure, and well, the Fibonacci, again, probably concept artists use it quite a lot, except the visual part of it. So this is something actually that I would like to discuss generally. If there are people who are even from code, or anybody with a sense of visual or musical background, that they could notice this somewhere else. Because this primarily was noticed first in music, and I was like, well, the VFX also has a sequence where we expect the explosion. So I think the animation also, if there's an attack, when the slash happens, this could potentially also be where our brains are expecting this to happen. So yeah, I'd say this answer is quite wishy-washy, because I'm quite focused in VFX, and I'm pretty sure I will be an VFX artist for the next 10 years. But yeah, this event will be probably for me to explore that further. Where are you? From which discipline are you yourself?
Design.
Ah.
There's a lot of sort of character crossover and things like that. So we're sort of specifically thinking about if we're tying that in with music in level and so forth. So like how to try and get all of those strands happening at the same timing.
Yeah.
And pulling everything together in that.
Yeah. So I guess in gameplay. Yeah, so maybe this could also be a form of inspiring your own team, of your own game designers. And the first thing that came up to my mind, perhaps a boss fight when we're anticipating that final slash. So it's also timed with music and potentially timed with the Fibonacci sequence. This is also quite open to research further, for if you'd like it yourselves, and share further, because I haven't really seen this on the internet or anything. I had to calculate it, and I was like, please work, please don't be just a theory. So yeah, this is quite fresh, and I would like this to be used and in further other disciplines. Yeah.
Hi, this is a comment rather than a question. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting. A couple of things that I picked up on this is my background is design, and part of this is a validation. The whole psychology of colour is kind of validation of the way that I've certainly approached it, and the reference to evolution and the evolutionary kind of development of humans and how they look at colours has kind of inspired me to go back and have a look at more of the evolution of man and try pick out those kind of primal things and see how we can employ them in design. So thank you very much.
Thank you. This means a lot because this is what, just going back to the nature and not like just looking at other games, I guess is the crucial part of being original.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. I would like to ask how much is concept art involved in your work? Like, do you get the concept art of the VFX you work on, or you just like inventing it by yourself?
Yeah, so currently on my project, I'm inventing it myself, although in a lot of bigger projects that have more time, the VFX artists usually either create concepts to validate first or get it from other artists. So a lot of times, I honestly could just start, like always starts with a mood board for sure, some visual pattern, something. But sometimes I start with just throwing together meshes and fixing the timing. Sometimes I'm just seeing what colors work best. Sometimes it starts with a few textures. So, and in all times, I notice there's no right or wrong. But if there is, for example, a project where there is an established pipeline for how to create VFX, I'm pretty sure it starts with the concept art, and that's probably the best way to do based on the time. But I did do a little bit of concept art before, and I always doodle just some flames or a bit of textures. But most times it's usually what I think about. It never ends up what I expected. Usually it's better. So it's a form of just tinkling and switching and timing those milliseconds and milli differences of the colors, and yeah.
Thank you for the talk. This is definitely not really going to be a question, but this talk has kind of like opened my eyes a little bit to like nature in art, kind of like seeing how you what was it? I'm basically thinking about like nature and shapes in art. I feel like there's probably so many different like variations that we could probably find. Like with the kind of like bullet train, and the front of the bullet train is kind of designed off the kind of like Japanese, that kind of beak bird. So yeah, I feel like there's probably so many different types of like naturally occurring shapes in art that we probably don't know. So yeah, it was a really good talk, really interesting.
I saw in like vehicle industry, the shapes of the soft cars are also based on women. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to explore here for sure.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi there.
Hello.
Also art department. The noisy bunch. Have you ever experienced a time where your creative freedom was restricted with how historically people would take in what you're trying to create? Like, we're talking about colors, we're talking about motion, but do you feel like there were instances where that would restrict you from being free to create something that's out of the ordinary?
Yeah, well, most of it, I guess, is also due to game design, where we're creating art based on what the document says, too. So if it doesn't supply with the gameplay and it overpowers the screen, like I can't just pull together the AoE attack on every single attack, on any kind of spell there is in the game, or maybe if the game is based, the game's focal point is VFX, for sure. Probably it's the best case where you can go extreme. But there are games where VFX are just like a very small part of it, where if they were not there, again, we would notice immediately that something's wrong. But if they are there, we're not supposed to notice them at all. If they are done right, we're not supposed to notice them. So sometimes dialing back is the core to being successful, because if the player will be like, why is this wind so in front, like, so there's so much wind, and I'm like, I can't click on something, well, that means I did my job poorly, and I have to do something a little bit more simple than that.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another art pleb. So you mentioned previously about the limitations of having realistic art versus stylized art in reference to water. I've previously worked on a project where there wasn't a bandwidth to create realistic water, so the whole game design of that specific area was changed to stop you seeing water. Have you ever worked on a project like that? And if so, how would you overcome something like that?
How did the water being just stop rendering? Just stopped?
No, it was specifically an ocean, and we made the decision not to do that because we didn't have either the skills or the tech resource to create that.
Was that a
project.
realistic game?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't really work on water in a realistic game before, only like in like personal projects where I could just go extreme. But I guess this is like almost a production kind of answer, because you kind of planned as well, this is a realistic game, that means we'll have to cut corners, it's going to be expensive to make, it's going to need a lot of resources. So I haven't been in that situation before, but I imagine this is all about planning beforehand, that these are going to be the most expensive and most important assets. Do we have the capability to do them? Like maybe the game it shouldn't be realistic then, because realism is hard to do. Stylistic stuff is like only after you can you can shave off some bits and you can get away with a lot of things, but realism you can't. So it's about planning. Sorry, it's not a straightforward answer, but I actually didn't know that this can happen. We'll keep in mind that if they say you'll need to do water, I might not be able to do water in the end.
Hey, thank you very much for the talk. I don't really have a question, but I do want to touch on like the color theory side of stuff. I'm really big into like believing that you can guide the player with like unconscious environmental decisions and use like the tribal associations with color. But the thing that always comes to my mind is like Santa and his red coat, and we only have that association because Coca-Cola branded him in that way. Same with Cadbury, we only associate the colour purple with chocolate because of the successful and consistent branding over the years. So I do believe that it's down to the studio to determine your own colour theory for your own game, and then make consistent decisions to encourage that behaviour throughout the game and use that effectively. And I would encourage also people to look at Mirror's Edge in particular. I think they use red a lot in that game to sort of guide the player, even though inherently red has nothing to do with like, red means open this door. Like it's, so I just something people to think about in terms of like, you get to decide what your colour theory is for your game, and work with the different departments to make sure that stuff's all singing and in time and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You should, continue my talk. But honestly, did you notice that in Mirror's Edge, the environment in general is kind of bluish, so it's all like a play of colors that are complementary, right? Yeah, so that's also that's a nice comment for sure.
Sorry, you're sick of this art department over here.
No, I'm really interested to hear more.
It's just like on what Kieran was saying, like do you get much friction from design? Say if you're like, I know you said both green and purple is like a poisonous, but do you get like the designers being like, no, we've decided all of our poison VFX is going to be blue? Is there ever like do you get much friction between that? Whereas it's not really color theory, I suppose.
Unfortunately, fortunately, the magic effects that I worked on, they were usually either something that I designed myself for my own project again, so I was my own boss to decide if I did anything that required more color. There was already sort of branding established of the game. So if I were to put something else, it would be like, again, it's part of a character too, so probably a part of their character design. So yeah, so I guess like a similar question before, as if I would ever try to fight the bias, but I guess the bias is still there. The conclusion I'm taking there is like, whoa, am I following the rules too much?
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ali, it's your turn. Ali, do you have one? You do have one. I see that.
Go on.
Very sorry. I've got a question about your creative process. And you play the piano and you have an input and you immediately hear and feel the output. And the same with maths. And I'm just wondering, how creatively satisfied are you when making your VFX? Because I'm quite ignorant as to how long they take. So do they take a couple of days, and are you kind of carried along by the anticipation of the output?
Yeah, so I usually have something in my mind, like the final result in my mind all the time. And when I reach a point where there are just like a few just particles left to add, I leave that effect to rest a bit. I wake up the next morning and I just keep looping the animation a lot of times. And it's almost like, if it's good, to confirm that it's good, it usually automatically like creates almost like a visual, like an audible sound in my head. So if you're looking at this, for example, it's not like, but you can feel that this would probably have an audio effect of like, or so it's like the same effects that I had before. It's also like, can I maybe go back? So even if I look at this, for example, I was like, so if a true VFX artist probably hears that in their head quite a lot of times, even if they're not musically, don't have musical background or not. But yeah, it's also a way to actually, it's rather official way to confirm whether it's good or not. It should create some sort of audio like that in your head. And even if your art, like my art director, or probably many directors out there, are like, like create something that just looks, it's like, got it. That's it. You're gonna get it. Don't worry about it. That's all I need to know. So, yeah, not sure if it answers yet again, but.
Wonderful talk as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm sort of going to ask the same question. So, but when you've got these timings in mathematical, is there always is there ever friction of no, we need all of our effects to be on this time exactly, so you can't use your formula? Do you get that much? Does that make sense? If it's design needs this VFX to last, I guess you can still apply the same formula, but is there ever moments where it's no, we need anticipations? No anticipation, but we want a big explosion, or is they give you creative freedom to be
there's
look.
Usually at least a split second of anticipation. Yeah. So and if you throw an explosion, just a regular explosion, they're usually called not boom, they're usually called kaboom, because there's a slight ka before the boom, like a slight shift before the huge vapor happens. So the anticipation doesn't need to be that exact seconds, because sometimes it takes just a millisecond to prepare you for what's about to happen. And so it's a matter of milliseconds whether it feels right or not, yet again.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm not going to give it to anyone here. I'm just going to...
Do you want to? Okay. This is talking about the color theory and unconscious bias that we have for certain colors. I'm going to use this as an example, but Overwatch with its healers, every single one of them has, except for a few, I think, have a different color for their healing abilities, and some of them have not necessarily red, but a pinkish, purpley red. Do you think that creates a barrier for the player to understand what's going on outside of the player character? So their teammates and things seeing, well, that's a healing character. Do you think that causes a barrier there, or is there a certain understanding with the character design that that character is kind of understandably a healer. Does that make sense?
Yes. So actually, the base, like the default, I noticed that the default characters, they usually have your regular colors like yellow or green, but only their skins have purple and red, if I'm not mistaken, from what I remember. Like, I don't know, like the first comes Mercy to my mind. Like she usually has the light, the yellow color, like your regular, nothing special. But then her skins could have various colors, and people who buy skins, they usually know what it's for. And even if they don't know, there's usually some other indicators like UI. There are sort of like the medicine sign particles that go out. They are usually like they're played then in other ways, but it's mostly if it's like a customizable thing. The base character, I haven't noticed. It's usually not too far from your light greens and yellows.
Sorry.
There's still time. You can. No.
I think question time's finished.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
no. Thank you so much, guys, for being so interesting. Thank you.